yeah, he's dead. And then to hear that scream was just, yeah, I will live with that for the rest of my life.
He was our little brother, but like our big brother, always looked after us, always looked after all the family. Just life and soul of our family, wasn't he?
We'd said that he didn't take drugs. Yeah, that's 100% he didn't.
We was worried, are the police doing their job? Why haven't they been in contact with us? Like, we had absolutely no support whatsoever because they made assumptions of what had happened to Jack. They just thought he had taken drugs, he had overdosed, there was nothing suspicious there.
Stephen Port took Jack's life, and was able to take Jack's life, because that's the long and short of it. He was able to. He was allowed to.
It was a humid evening in East London, June 17, 2014, just past 11 p.m., when 23-year-old Anthony Walgate left his friend's apartment in Barking. He was smiling, laughing, scrolling through his phone, unaware that this night would become the last he would ever know. Anthony, like many young men in the city, had turned to a popular dating app to meet someone new, someone he could trust. A connection that promised companionship, maybe even a spark of love. By 8 a.m. the next morning, paramedics arrived at Cook Street. A young man was found slumped on the pavement outside a seemingly ordinary flat. Neighbors glanced briefly, whispered about a possible overdose, and life went on. But behind the quiet streets and the ordinary facades, a pattern was quietly taking shape, one that would shatter families, traumatize friends, and expose vulnerabilities in a system that should have protected them. This is the story of Stephen Port, a man who presented himself as kind, approachable, even friendly, and yet left a trail of death in his wake. For young men, each with hopes, dreams, and families who adored them, all drawn into a web that began with trust and ended in tragedy. As we unravel this case, you'll meet the victims in their own words, understand the choices they made, and witness the slow uncovering of a killer who manipulated the ordinary moments of life into instruments of horror. We'll explore the failures, the warnings that went unheeded, and the shocking reality of what happened when love turned to death. Before we continue, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this story. Let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? Every voice matters in keeping these stories alive, in honoring those who were lost, and in learning from the mistakes that allowed these tragedies to unfold. Thank you for your incredible support. Red Heart, your viewership keeps this channel alive, and with our YouTube membership, you can unlock exclusive insights, behind-the-scenes research, and premium content that dives deeper into the cases we cover. Together, we explore the stories that must be told, so that no one is forgotten, and every lesson is learned. Stephen Port was born on January 16, 1975, in London, England, into a family that seemed ordinary at first glance, yet beneath the surface, tensions quietly shaped the life of a boy who would one day shock the nation. From an early age, Stephen displayed a keen intellect, excelling in subjects like chemistry and biology, often spending hours experimenting in his bedroom. His parents described him as quiet, polite, and withdrawn, a child who preferred the company of books and solitary pursuits to the boisterous games of other children in his neighborhood. Growing up, Stephen faced subtle pressures from his family environment. His relationship with his father was distant, his father often critical and emotionally unavailable, while his mother oscillated between warmth and strict expectations. This dynamic left Stephen seeking validation in private ways, turning inward rather than outward, a pattern that would later influence his interactions with others. By the time he entered his teenage years, he was socially awkward, struggling to form meaningful friendships, and increasingly aware of how different he felt from his peers. It was during these formative years that Stephen began to understand his sexuality. He realized he was attracted to men, a realization that initially brought confusion and secrecy. He experimented privately, often using anonymous encounters to explore his desires while keeping them hidden from family and classmates. Friends and acquaintances would later describe him as charming when the situation suited him, but his warmth often masked an inner detachment and a careful calculation in how he presented himself. School psychologists noted some concerning patterns. While there was no formal diagnosis of psychopathy or severe personality disorder in his youth, records indicate Stephen exhibited traits such as manipulativeness, a lack of empathy, and a fascination with control and observation. He showed an unusual interest in how people reacted under stress or influence, often asking probing questions and testing boundaries, though teachers at the time dismissed these behaviors as curiosity. In his late teens, Stephen began working odd jobs in London, blending routine labor with an emerging skill in navigating social spaces, particularly within LGBTQ communities. He frequented pubs and clubs, observing the behaviors and vulnerabilities of those around him. What stood out, however, was his meticulous attention to detail, his ability to appear charming while silently cataloging interactions for future use. Those who knew him at the time could not have imagined what he was capable of, but subtle warnings were already there: a boy who enjoyed chemistry experiments a little too much, who kept meticulous notes, who studied reactions with a precision that hinted at methodical planning. Beneath the ordinary exterior, Stephen Port was quietly preparing a path that would intertwine desire, control, and ultimately, lethal violence. By the time he reached his mid-20s, his understanding of his sexuality, combined with his intelligence and social detachment, created a unique and dangerous profile. This was a man capable of appearing harmless while harboring impulses that would escalate into a series of carefully orchestrated crimes, leaving a trail of victims and unanswered questions that would haunt London's communities. It was June 19, 2014, in the vibrant district of Gants Hill, East London, when Stephen Port's calculated charm first met its mark. Anthony Walgate, a 23-year-old aspiring fashion designer with a bright future and a warm, approachable demeanor, had been scrolling through an online dating platform, unaware that his next connection would bring danger rather than romance. When he received a message from Stephen, the initial conversation seemed harmless, friendly, flirtatious, and even attentive. Stephen's early interactions were designed to lower suspicion, to build trust, and to create the illusion of a shared desire and understanding. Anthony later described their conversation as engaging, almost effortless. Stephen positioned himself as empathetic, understanding, and patient, a man who listened and asked the right questions. But beneath the surface, Stephen was already assessing Anthony's vulnerabilities, his social routines, the times he was alone, and the subtle habits that could be exploited. Over the following weeks, he carefully orchestrated meetings under the guise of dating, using charm as a weapon, and creating a false sense of safety. On June 19, after a series of seemingly innocuous messages, Anthony agreed to meet Stephen at his flat in Barking. What began as casual flirtation quickly turned deadly. Stephen offered him a drink, a seemingly ordinary cocktail, but laced with GHB, a powerful central nervous system depressant known for its incapacitating effects. In those first critical minutes, Anthony's consciousness was slowly eroded by the drug, leaving him vulnerable, disoriented, and trusting of the very man who had orchestrated his downfall. Once Anthony was incapacitated, Stephen executed his plan with chilling precision. He used a cord to strangle Anthony, his actions methodical, rehearsed, and devoid of hesitation. After the murder, he wrapped the body in sheets and placed it in a public alley near Barking Station, a location he had chosen carefully to both conceal and yet eventually reveal, ensuring the discovery would cause shock but provide him with a sense of control over the timing. The discovery of Anthony Walgate's body on June 19, 2014, at approximately 7:30 p.m., sent immediate ripples through the local community. Residents were horrified by the young man's death, yet at the time, police investigations treated the death as suspicious but lacked the connection to a calculated serial offender. Stephen, meanwhile, maintained the facade of normalcy, returning to his routines, interacting with neighbors, and presenting himself as a concerned community member, a man who could not have appeared more ordinary. This first murder marked the beginning of a pattern that would come to define Stephen Port's predatory behavior. He had discovered the mechanics of manipulation, the vulnerabilities of his targets, and the meticulous steps required to carry out his crimes while evading suspicion. Anthony's death, tragic and senseless, would later provide investigators with the initial threads to unravel the complex web of deceit, grooming, and murder. Even as friends and family mourned, Stephen Port was already planning his next encounters, his understanding of human trust and desire sharpening with each act. The chilling reality is that, in those moments following Anthony's death, a serial killer was learning and evolving, preparing to strike again with the same victims that would eventually expose the depth of his cruelty. By the summer of 2014, Stephen Port had refined his methods, his confidence in manipulation and control growing with each encounter. After the murder of Anthony Walgate in June, the shadows of his crimes remained hidden from authorities, yet for Stephen, the first success was a lesson in both opportunity and risk. Within weeks, he sought new targets, carefully selecting men who were young, socially vulnerable, and active in London's gay scene, many of whom were navigating the complexities of anonymity and trust in online dating. Gareth Wright, 21, became his next victim. Their initial connection was formed through the same online platforms, where Stephen's charm and attentiveness masked his intentions. Gareth described their conversations as comfortable and flattering, yet Stephen had a calculated approach. He studied schedules, observed habits, and created a sense of dependency before striking. On July 27, 2014, he invited Gareth to his Barking flat, offering drinks laced with GHB. Once Gareth was incapacitated, Stephen repeated the method that had been effective before, strangulation, before leaving the body near a public location, this time in Ilford, carefully choosing a spot that would be discovered yet avoid suspicion of foul play linked to him. Following Gareth, the pattern continued. Jack Taylor, 25, and Daniel Whitworth, 23, would later become victims, each meeting the same meticulous planning and manipulation. Stephen's interactions were consistent. Online communication built trust, isolation in private spaces ensured control, and drugs were used to subdue. Each murder revealed an evolving sense of methodology, as he learned which locations allowed him to operate undetected and how to maintain a public persona that kept neighbors and acquaintances unsuspecting. What stands out in this sequence is not just the number of victims, but the psychological profile it reveals. Stephen Port had mastered the art of appearing harmless, even charming, while simultaneously exploiting the vulnerabilities of his victims. He understood social dynamics, the allure of attentiveness, and the human desire to connect, and he weaponized these insights. Friends of later victims described Stephen as friendly, engaging, and trustworthy, never imagining the dark intentions behind his warmth. Even as London's gay community mourned the unexplained disappearances, the connections between the deaths remained invisible to authorities. Stephen continued to live among neighbors, colleagues, and friends without suspicion. His meticulous nature extended beyond the crimes themselves. He maintained digital records, tracked communications, and studied patterns of police investigation to anticipate scrutiny. This period also marked an escalation in the audacity of his behavior. Unlike the first murder, which carried an air of experimentation, subsequent killings were executed with precision and a growing confidence in his ability to evade detection. Stephen Port had moved beyond impulse. He had developed a calculated system. He learned how to exploit societal blind spots, from assumptions about adult men's social lives to biases in missing persons investigations, ensuring that his actions remained under the radar. By late 2014, a pattern had emerged that would eventually become the foundation for the investigation that exposed his crimes. Young men were disappearing after meeting a man who seemed ordinary, approachable, and attentive. Each incident carried the hallmarks of Stephen Port's method: grooming, control, incapacitation, and a public disposal that masked the true nature of the crimes. Yet for now, the full extent of his actions remained hidden, a chilling reminder that even in the heart of a bustling city, danger could operate unnoticed, carried out by a man who smiled, conversed, and blended seamlessly into daily life. By late 2014, the disappearances of young men across East London had begun to draw attention, but the connection between them remained elusive. Anthony Walgate, Gareth Wright, Jack Taylor, and Daniel Whitworth had all vanished after meeting someone they trusted, leaving friends and family desperate for answers. The Metropolitan Police opened multiple missing persons investigations, yet each case was treated separately, viewed as isolated incidents rather than potential links in a broader pattern. Initial inquiries revealed few concrete leads. Witness statements were limited, as many of the victims had spent time with Stephen Port in private settings before vanishing. He had carefully masked his movements, avoided surveillance cameras where possible, and maintained a digital trail that appeared innocuous. Even forensic evidence was sparse. The use of GHB rendered toxicology testing complex, as the drug metabolized quickly, leaving minimal traces in post-mortem examinations. For detectives, this chemical invisibility added layers of frustration and confusion. Family members were vocal, desperate for information. Anthony Walgate's friends described his cautious nature and attention to personal safety, highlighting the calculated way Stephen had earned his trust. The suddenness of Anthony's disappearance, coupled with Gareth Wright's vanishing a month later, began to suggest to some in the community that there might be more at play, though official acknowledgement lagged. Social media posts, online discussions, and community meetings amplified concern, yet law enforcement remained cautious in drawing connections without concrete evidence. By December 2014, investigators had started to examine similarities between the cases. All victims were young men, all had been active in online dating communities, and all had been last seen with a man fitting Stephen Port's description. However, confirmation proved difficult. The absence of eyewitness accounts in the moments leading to each disappearance, combined with the social stigma and assumptions surrounding the LGBTQ+ community, contributed to investigative blind spots. Stephen Port, meanwhile, observed the growing attention with calculated patience. He adjusted his methods slightly, learning to vary meeting locations and times, ensuring each interaction appeared casual and spontaneous. He studied police reports where possible, taking note of the gaps and oversights. His ability to blend in with neighbors and maintain a seemingly normal life became a crucial element in evading detection, reinforcing the sense that he could operate undisturbed in plain sight. As the investigation progressed, small clues began to emerge. Inquiries revealed that some victims had been seen leaving clubs or bars with a man who offered rides home or drinks at his flat. CCTV footage captured fleeting glimpses of interactions, though they were often too brief or ambiguous to yield actionable leads. Detectives began to recognize the potential significance of GHB in these cases, noting that incapacitated victims would leave minimal signs of struggle, complicating forensic assessment. For families, the wait was agonizing. Parents and siblings demanded answers, growing frustrated with perceived delays and the lack of interlinked investigation. One of Gareth Wright's friends recalled, "We all felt something was wrong, but no one was listening the way they should have." The sense of helplessness in the community mirrored the calculated patience Stephen exercised. While police searched in fragments, he continued to operate, learning and refining his methods. By the end of 2014, the investigation had gained momentum but remained incomplete. Detectives recognized the possibility of a serial offender, yet the evidence was circumstantial, scattered, and frustratingly indirect. Each missing man represented both a tragedy and a piece of the larger puzzle that would eventually expose the calculated terror Stephen Port had inflicted on East London. The stage was set for the next phase, the relentless search for patterns, overlooked clues, and the first breakthrough that would bring his crimes into the light. By 2015, the missing persons investigations had intensified, and public pressure on the Metropolitan Police grew. Families demanded answers, journalists began scrutinizing the cases, and the community's unease escalated. Yet, for months, the threads connecting the disappearances remained frustratingly tenuous. It wasn't until the meticulous work of detectives revisiting CCTV footage and witness reports that patterns began to emerge, pointing toward a single suspect, Stephen Port. The breakthrough came in September 2015, when investigators noted a disturbing similarity across the cases. Each victim had been seen leaving clubs and social venues with a man offering a ride home or inviting them to a flat. Footage captured the same pale-haired individual, who appeared affable and approachable, yet his calm demeanor belied the danger he carried. Interviews with club staff and friends reinforced the identification. Stephen Port's movements, once erratic and unpredictable, now appeared in a chillingly deliberate pattern. A search warrant was issued for Stephen's flat in Barking, East London, on September 27, 2015. Detectives approached cautiously, fully aware that the suspect had demonstrated careful planning and manipulative skill. Inside, the scene confirmed their worst suspicions. Evidence meticulously documented by police included GHB vials, syringes, personal effects of the victims, and detailed records of interactions. Port had not only preserved physical evidence of his crimes but had also recorded aspects of his control over the men, leaving an unnerving insight into his mindset. When confronted, Stephen Port attempted to explain, claiming innocence or attributing victims' deaths to accidents, yet his composure could not conceal the inconsistencies in his account. The combination of physical evidence, digital communications, and witness testimonies created an overwhelming case. One detective later recalled, "It was one of the most methodically documented series of crimes I had seen. Everything was planned to maintain appearances while he executed his intentions." The arrest was executed with precision, and Stephen was taken into custody without resistance. The impact on the victims' families was immediate and profound, grief mingled with relief, tempered by the shock that someone so seemingly ordinary could carry out repeated acts of calculated violence. Statements from friends described disbelief and horror, recalling interactions that had seemed innocent, trusting, and even warm, echoing the deceptive charm Port had cultivated for years. The legal proceedings that followed would reveal the full scale of the atrocities. Prosecutors meticulously laid out the evidence, detailing how GHB had been used to incapacitate the men, the patterns of Port's online interactions, and the methodical disposal of the victims' bodies. The courtroom became a space where the public could finally confront the details long suspected but never confirmed. Families of the victims attended hearings, seeking both justice and understanding, while the media captured the tension, horror, and humanity intertwined in every revelation. Expert testimony illuminated the psychological elements driving Stephen Port's actions. Forensic psychologists described a blend of compulsive control, calculated predation, and a distorted perception of intimacy. While not absolving his actions, these insights helped the court, and the public, understand the mechanics of manipulation that had allowed him to operate undetected. The arrest marked a pivotal moment, ending a series of disappearances that had terrorized London's gay community for over a year. Yet the consequences of his crimes extended beyond the legal realm, prompting systemic questions about how missing persons cases are treated, particularly in marginalized communities. Stephen Port's capture illuminated both the horrors of his methods and the societal gaps that had allowed them to persist. Even in custody, Port remained composed, his demeanor calm yet inscrutable. For detectives, families, and the public, the arrest was both a resolution and a reminder: evil can hide behind the most ordinary smiles, and vigilance, persistence, and human courage are essential in uncovering it. The courtroom was tense on November 22, 2016, as Stephen Port faced charges for the deaths of Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Kovari, Daniel Whitworth, and Jack Taylor. Families of the victims, alongside a public drawn to the case's shocking details, filled the gallery, their eyes fixed on a man who had once appeared so ordinary in East London streets. Prosecutors presented a meticulous narrative, linking digital communications, CCTV footage, and forensic evidence that chronicled Port's manipulation, use of GHB, and calculated predation. Witnesses, including friends and family members, testified about the personalities, habits, and vulnerabilities of the victims. Statements revealed a haunting truth: these young men had sought connection, trust, and companionship, only to meet betrayal and violence at the hands of someone they had briefly trusted. In detailing their lives, the court acknowledged the human stories often lost behind the stark statistics of crime. Digital forensics revealed an unsettling pattern: messages, dating profiles, and records of Port's movements painted a portrait of deliberate planning. Surveillance footage placed him with multiple victims before their deaths, while chemical analysis confirmed incapacitation through GHB, sometimes at lethal doses. Prosecutors highlighted these findings not merely to document crimes, but to emphasize the careful, repeated intent behind them. Stephen Port's defense attempted to portray the deaths as accidents or coincidences, yet the accumulation of evidence, timelines, victim interactions, and recorded actions, left little room for doubt. Forensic experts explained how GHB's properties allowed Port to manipulate and control, providing both the physical means and psychological advantage to commit repeated offenses undetected. The courtroom became a space where science, human testimony, and ethical considerations converged. After weeks of testimony, on November 24, 2016, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty on all counts. Sentencing followed immediately, with the judge describing Port's actions as a calculated and prolonged betrayal of trust, emphasizing both the premeditation and the profound impact on the victims' families and the wider community. Port received a life sentence with a whole-life order, ensuring he would never be released. The verdict resonated far beyond the courtroom. Families expressed relief tinged with sorrow, aware that justice, though served, could never restore what had been lost. Community leaders and LGBTQ+ advocates reflected on systemic failures, questioning why early warning signs had been overlooked and how social biases may have delayed intervention. The case became a touchstone for discussion on safety, trust, and the vulnerability of marginalized communities. For law enforcement, the trial prompted reviews of investigative procedures and missing persons protocols. Detectives noted the importance of recognizing patterns and maintaining sensitivity to community concerns, emphasizing that rigorous, empathetic policing can prevent tragedies. Even after the verdict, the emotional ripples continued. Friends and family recalled the vibrant personalities of the victims, juxtaposed with the horror of their deaths, and sought ways to honor their memory while advocating for awareness. Stephen Port's conviction served as both closure and caution, a reminder of the darkness that can hide behind ordinary appearances, and of the vigilance and humanity required to uncover it. In the months following Stephen Port's conviction, the City of London continued to reckon with the impact of his crimes. Families of the victims carried the weight of grief, yet also sought ways to memorialize their loved ones, creating foundations and awareness campaigns focused on safety, education, and the prevention of drug-facilitated crimes. Their resilience highlighted a vital truth: even amid tragedy, human courage and compassion persist. The investigation and trial exposed gaps in the way missing persons reports, particularly in marginalized communities, were handled. Official reviews prompted reforms, ensuring that patterns of vulnerability and repeated reports of suspicious activity would be taken seriously in the future. Advocacy groups emphasized the importance of visibility, trust in law enforcement, and support networks, ensuring that lessons from Port's crimes would resonate beyond individual cases. Psychologists reflected on the complex nature of predation, control, and manipulation exhibited in Port's actions. His case became a reference point for understanding how charm and normalcy can mask deliberate, calculated violence. Experts emphasized the moral responsibility of society to remain vigilant, to recognize subtle signs of abuse, and to provide safe spaces for those at risk. For the public, the story of Stephen Port is a reminder of both human vulnerability and strength. It underscores the necessity of empathy, awareness, and systemic accountability. Though the lives lost can never be restored, the commitment to justice, reflection, and prevention ensures that their memories contribute to a safer, more conscientious community. As we reflect on this case, ask yourself, how can trust be both precious and fragile, and what responsibility do we share in protecting those most at risk? The legacy of the Stephen Port case is not only a cautionary tale, but also a call to action, urging vigilance, compassion, and the enduring pursuit of justice. Before you continue exploring this story, like, subscribe, and share so more people can uncover the truths hidden in these cases. Where are you watching this from today? Thank you for your incredible support. Your engagement helps us continue creating the stories that matter, bringing real-life lessons to light.